Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I'm Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us, coming to you from Washington's premier indoor shooting facility. Of course, that's Security Gun Club right here in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, a couple months ago, we did this video right here, and it got a lot of traction, a lot of views, and that's good for Washington Gun Law. But listen, it's bad for the country because I think it speaks volumes for what state we are in. You see, the video was all about what do you do if your car gets surrounded by an angry mob, and the mere fact that there was that much popularity speaks volumes for where we're at, doesn't it? So here's the thing. Apparently, I thought this was a flash in the pan, but there appears to be a political movement quite active around the United States right now that believes the best way to achieve a ceasefire halfway around the world is, of course, to, block major interstates here in the United States. And that appears to be the new protest tactic. Now, it has many of you wondering, what can I do? When can I do it? What can't I do? What happens if I do it wrong? And the previous video, I think, did a good job, but we're going to try to break it down a different way for you so you could really understand. So today, let's slow it all down. We'll geek out on the law for a little bit, and we'll talk about another lesson on protesters blocking the road. Okay, so here's the hypothetical. You're just minding your own business, driving along one day, heading to the airport, heading to the shopping mall, heading to work, who knows, and suddenly you find yourself in the middle of a pro-Palestinian protest. You didn't have that on your schedule that day. You didn't really see it in your Outlook calendar, but suddenly you're in the middle of a major interstate in your downtown, and yep, you are engaged in the middle of a very vociferous pro-Palestinian protest. Now, they are creating all sorts of inconvenience. They're going to make you late for work, late for your flight, whatever it may be, late for your doctor's appointment. And you are at this point essentially stuck, right? You can't just run them over. You want to, but you can't. And you certainly can't back up because, well, you're on a roadway in which there's about a mile's worth of cars now piled up behind you. Okay, now let's go over some acceptable universal rules of engagement so we can all kind of start from the same baseline when it comes to law, with the caveat that I want all of you to check with a local lawyer because, yes, self-defense laws do change from state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. There are little nuances. I can assure you self-defense laws in California are radically different than those in Texas. Okay, rule number one. Anytime we want to use force to defend ourselves or others, either we or that other individual needs to be in imminent threat of having unlawful force used against them, okay? Number two, if we decide to use force to defend ourselves or others, the force we use has to be, one, necessary, it has to, two, be reasonable, that is both objectively and subjectively, and finally, and most importantly, it needs to be proportional. And oftentimes it is that last category where people get themselves in trouble. They had every right in the world to use force, both objectively and subjectively, no matter how you looked at it. The problem is they end up using excessive force. Okay, next rule, we do not get to use lethal force unless, one, we are in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, two, someone else in our presence is in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, three, we have a felony being committed upon our person, or four, we have a felony being committed inside our home. Again, there could be other exceptions to your laws. Check with your local jurisdiction. The next rule we need to agree on, in almost all jurisdictions in the United States, the ability to use lethal force is not permissible to defend only property. And finally, we have to agree that if you just step on the gas, floor it, and intentionally run over a protester as hard as you can, that will be analyzed as the use of lethal force. Okay, now to try to get all of you to understand what you can do as a motorist, what we're actually going to do for purposes of this explanation is we are going to remove from this equation two things. We're going to remove the car. There is no car in this, and we're going to remove the roadway. You're not actually on a public roadway. Instead, what I want you to imagine is that you are walking down a one-way alley. That alley only allows you to walk in one direction, okay? Now, as you begin to walk down that alley, this person is going to step out and block your freedom of movement from moving down the alley, okay? This is going to be our hypothetical, because this is how I want you to view it. Now, the first hypothetical is that as you try to move down the alley, this person just simply gets in your way. They don't do anything to you. They don't say anything to you. They don't threaten you in any way. They are just one big, gigantic obstruction. What could you do if you were in that alley? Well, you could just kind of walk around them, I suppose. Or, as what this person in Hollywood, California did, this. Now, as you can see, they are merely just going to get around the protesters here. They're going to move in a very slow and safe and prudent manner and get themselves out of that situation. Now, if by chance you can't just get around them and they continue to block your way, then at that point, since your freedom of movement has been restricted, this is an unlawful use of force against you, and that individual who's blocking the roadway is actually the first aggressor, which means in many instances they will not be able to use self-defense. You could use reasonable force to remove the obstruction from the alley, or in the instance that we're talking about, reasonable force like they did here in Germany. You could use reasonable force to remove the obstruction from the roadway, and if the obstruction decides to re-obstruct, as you can see, you can again still remove them. Now again, the use of force there was very reasonable. They were using what minimal force was needed in order to get them off the roadway. Now they drug them over to the sidewalk and put the beat down on them. Albeit, I know many of you think they probably deserve that, but that is probably not legally justified. Now, here's what you couldn't do to the guy in the alley is you couldn't pull out your 9mm and run 2 rounds through him simply because he was blocking your way. Or, case in point, as this one happened in Seattle during our Summer of Love in 2020, yeah, this is an absolutely inappropriate use of force on protesters that were blocking Interstate 5. Okay, now, here's the next hypothetical. We're still walking down that one-way alley, and that dude is still blocking us, and in our possession is a piece of valuable property. It matters greatly to us. And as we get to the gentleman who's blocking the alley and he keeps moving around side to side so that we can't get by, he also begins to try to attempt to damage the property that you're carrying. Let's say it's a very valuable painting that you have with it, and it's one that has both financial and sentimental value to you. And he is absolutely positively trying to damage and or destroy that painting. Now, do you have the right to use more force? Well, you do actually, don't you? Because now it is your property that is actually physically being threatened. Take another way, is this any different where suddenly you're in a pro-Palestinian rally and now they're pounding the living hell out of your car and damaging it? So yes, now that we actually have property that's being damaged, our use of force can increase. However, we're only talking about property. So this was the subject of the previous video we did, which this gentleman has a car that's absolutely getting pounded on by all sorts of protesters. I think he makes a very quick and rapid escape. He never strikes a single protester. Yeah, he takes a lot of evasive actions. Yeah, that's probably technically in violation of a few traffic codes, but you know what? That's what was necessary in order to protect the property. I believe that is a proper use of force. Now, you compare that to this one here in New York, unfortunately, which once again, we end up with people pounding on the car. So they have the right to use a little bit of force to defend the car. Driving away in a slow, safe, prudent manner would probably be the best way of doing it. But no, here they decide to gas it. They go, and unfortunately, they do strike multiple protesters, seriously injuring a couple of them, and now they are subject to criminal charges. Okay, and then the last scenario is you're walking down this alley. This big old goon still comes out to block your way, but now instead of just blocking your way, well, he's actually trying to physically assault you, or he's trying to stab you, or he's trying to mug you, or he's trying to sexually assault you. At that point, it ain't about your freedom of movement anymore. The hell with your freedom of movement. You are now in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. And at that point, yeah, you're allowed to use lethal force to defend yourself. Now, I believe that when all of a sudden windows start getting smashed out of a car, you are already in imminent threat of serious bodily injury, because anybody who's ever been in a car accident or known anyone that's gone through a windshield knows that glass can damage humans quite effectively. Flying glass can be very dangerous, especially to exposed eyeballs, and can result in very, very serious and permanent injury. The other thing you have to realize is, hey, listen, once they're smashing the windows out, they are likely using objects to do that, which means those very large and heavy objects are also coming through the window with great velocity and could strike the driver or other passengers if there were there, thus placing them in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. And then finally, listen, I believe it is a reasonable interpretation that once the windows are being smashed out and they're reaching for you, they're not really worried about the car anymore. They're actually after you. And at that point, it's not about freedom of movement. It's not about property. It's not even about a simple assault against you. It is, at that point, a life and death matter. Now, remember, there is one critical difference between the hypothetical and the real life example, which is that the real life example has you inside a car, which does provide a level of protection until, of course, they start smashing the windows and everything. So your ability to claim that your body was being threatened by merely pounding on the car is probably a bit of a Hail Mary pass. But again, once the doors are getting open, the windows are being smashed out, things like that, hey, all bets are off. Now, what I hope today did is we were able to take that example that we used about you walking down an alley and understand that, listen, if we put you on a roadway and put you in a car and that same level of unlawful force was being used against you then, you would have a clear picture of what force can be used, when it can be used, and what happens if you improperly use force. Listen, if you have any other questions about what happens if you just head to work one day and accidentally find yourself in the middle of a pro-Palestinian protest, go ahead and place those down there in the description box. If you got any other questions about what's left of our Second Amendment rights, you guys should know how to get a hold of Washington gun law by now. If you don't, that's okay. That information is also down there in the description box. Now, in the meantime, let's everyone remember that part of being the lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here, is to know what the law is in every situation, how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching and stay safe.